Hey everybody, it's Chizu, developer of PPRNG, and this time I'm going to go through setting up a profile and doing the calibration. Now the first time you run PPRNG, it's going to give you a little pop-up. It's basically telling you, please create a profile. So that's what we're going to do. Profiles, add new profile. And it gives you another pop-up telling you need to enter all this information. It's very important. So I'll start with name, which is of course Chizu. You need to give your profile a name. Next is the game version. Currently PPRNG supports these 4 games, black 2, white 2, black and white. For this demo I'm going to be using white 2. And next you have to set the language. So for this demo I'm actually going to be using a Japanese version, so I'm going to change the language to Japanese. The next 2 items, the trainer ID and the secret ID, you need to set these if you want to get shinies. For this video I'm just going to skip them because we're not doing that yet. But if you know your trainer ID and secret ID, you can go ahead and enter them. The next item, memory link. This item indicates whether you've used the memory link between your black 2, white 2 game and a black or white game. This is important because if you've used that link, it affects the initial frames for the PID RNG, if you know what that means. If you don't, doesn't matter, but the point is you need to set whether you've done this or not. And I've done it, so I'm going to set it to used. One thing to note, even if you haven't done it, there are some people who have the experience of their games behaving as if they've already done it. So if you haven't done it, go ahead and set it to not used, but be aware that if you're having trouble calibrating, you might need to come back into your profile and change it to used and try calibration again. You might find you're successful. We don't know why that happens, but it does happen for some people. The item next to that, shiny charm, we're just going to skip past that right now, but if you have it, go ahead and indicate that you do. Next, console type. It's your DS or DSi or 3DS. So DS means original fat DS or the DS Lite. DSi is any DSi model, DSi, DSi XL, etc. 3DS is the same, 3DS, 3DS XL, etc. I'm using a DS for this demo. And then you need to put in the MAC address of the DS that you're using. If you're using a DS or DS Lite, you find that inside the game itself there's a menu for Wi-Fi settings. If you're using a DSi or 3DS, you can get it from the system menu before you start the game, somewhere inside the network settings, I believe. Anyway, you need to enter your MAC address. So I'll just go ahead and do that now. Right. You're basically done at this point for an initial setup, but there's a few more items in your profile, and I'll just cover them quickly. Next one, game launch delay seconds. This is the amount of time it takes between when you start the game from the DS menu and when the game actually creates the seed for the random number generators. If you're using a DS, this is going to be 1 second. DSi is 2 or 3 seconds, and a 3DS is 7 or 8 seconds. PPRNG will set a default value here based on the type of console you've chosen. So probably you should start by leaving that with the default setting. The next item, time setting delay seconds. Not very well worded, but the meaning of this is how much time does it take you to set the time on your DS console and get back to the menu from which you start the game So in the case of a DS, that means you go into your system settings, and as soon as you set that system time, you have to turn off the power, turn the power back on, and get back to the menu. And that takes, if you're fast, it can be 12 or 13 seconds. PPRNG sets a default 15 seconds for a DS. So generally you probably want to leave these alone unless you know exactly what you want. And the last settings, these are the parameter ranges. This is what we're going to use calibration to discover. If you've been doing RNG manipulation for a while, then you already know these values. But this video is about calibration as well, so I'm going to leave them blank. Right, so done with that profile. And now PPRNG tells you, hey, you need to do calibration. So there's our new profile. White 2, Japanese, DS, there's a MAC address. And the name. So go ahead and choose that. Initially, if you haven't completed your profile, meaning filled in your parameter ranges, you're just going to have the choices of doing parameter searches. If you're using black 2 and white 2, you have two ways of doing this, either through the Unova Link Key system or by catching a Pokemon and checking its IVs. We'll start this video with the Unova Link method. If you're using black or white, you can only do the IV method. There was no Unova Link in black and white. So I'll go ahead and choose Unova Link. Create a new search. You can see here these are the settings we just previously entered in our profile. And there's only a few items you're going to need to fill in for this search. You're going to need to set the date and the time at which you start your DS for this process. You'll see in a minute I'm going to start, I said start the DS, I mean start your game from the DS menu. You're going to see in a few minutes I'm going to start the game from the DS to begin this calibration process, and I'm going to enter the date and time here. The next one is held buttons. So you can affect what kind of seed you get by holding down buttons on your DS as it starts up, and this entry allows you to specify which buttons you were holding down. For a first time calibration, definitely go with no buttons. And normally when you're calibrating you don't need any buttons, but the option is here because some people feel that they get different behavior when they hold buttons. The last and most important item, this is the spinner sequence. This is what we're going to enter that's used to determine the seed that we're hitting, and through that the parameters that we can hit. This is just basically a series of arrows. It's going to correspond to something we're going to see on the screen in the Unova Link Key system in just a moment. So I'm going to go over to the DS now. Alright, here I am at the DS startup screen, or rather the menu from which you start your game. The thing to note here is what is the date and time on your DS. So you need to set that in PPRNG. So it's 2013, October 26th. It's actually about 48 minutes after midnight as I'm making this video. And I'm going to start my white 2 game. This is Japanese, as we saw previously when I set up my profile. I'm going to start it when the time rolls over to 12:49. And there we go, I started the game. And at this point you shouldn't touch anything until this Pokemon logo appears, at which point you're free to hit your A button to skip to the menu. Okay, let me just go back here to my calibration here, and I'm going to enter the time that I started the game from the DS menu, and that was 49 minutes after midnight on October 26th. Back to the spinner sequence because that's what we're going to do next. Okay, it's in Japanese, sorry. I live in Japan, I have Japanese games. This is the Unova Link menu item. You should have something called Unova Link in your English language game. If you choose that, you come into this menu, and the first item says Key System. I believe it's the same in English. We're going to use that to do our calibration, and then we have Key Transfer. So this is where we are going to, I guess you could say, take some measurements of our system. So when you select Key Transfer, it tells you it's going to start doing an infrared transfer. Is that okay? And as soon as you click yes, down here in the bottom right, there's going to be a little image that appears. It's the same image that appears when you save your game. It's that kind of ticking clock. And what you want to do is you want to take note of the first position that appears. So let me go ahead and do that once. Pay attention right about here, and hopefully you can see that initial position. Alright, that was up. Easy enough. So go back to PPRNG, and I'm going to tap up, right? It says up. And what we're going to do is we're going to repeat this for a total of 8 times, and just enter each arrow position as we see it in sequence. I was up also, so we choose up again. One important thing, do not exit the key system menu. If you exit, it's basically the same as soft resetting your system, and it will set a new seed, and basically you'll have to start from the beginning with this process. So just something to be aware of. Alright, we head down right. Down right again. Upright. Up. Just 2 more. Left. And right. Okay. We've done 8. 8 is a good amount. Should be enough to determine what the parameters were. So I'll go ahead and click search. You can see it ticking through a bunch of seeds as it searches. And we found 1 result. Lucky us. Sometimes you'll find more than 1 result. If you do find more than 1 result, the thing to do is to click this edit search and say I want to edit this search. And you would go back here to your spinner sequence and just go back to your game and do that 1 more time. Now remember, you haven't exited the key system menu this whole time. So I'll just do 1 more. That was left again. I didn't need to do this time, but I'm just doing this to demonstrate what you would do. Run that search 1 more time. And you should probably only have 1 result at that point. So what you've got here, you've got a time. This is the time that the seed was created. And you'll notice that's 1 second after we started it from the DS system menu. That's the same 1 second I discussed previously in the startup delay when setting up your profile. Then there's the timer 0, the V count, and the V frame. Now what you do at this point is you go ahead and tap that result, and it asks you if you want to add the result to your profile. I'm going to say OK. It pops up your profile, and it's already filled in those numbers. Now, with particularly with black 2 and white 2, there's quite a range of timer 0 values possible. Most people have at least 3 or 4 that they hit on a regular basis, and sometimes there's 10 or more possible values in total. So you're going to want to do this calibration process several times to get a complete view of the range of timer 0 values. As for V frame and V count, those generally will not change. With black 2 and white 2, V count has been known to change by one value one way or the other if you're using a DSi or 3DS. So that's just something to be aware of. But normally it's only timer 0 that's going to change. Anyway, that's been added to the profile. Go ahead and say done. It says, hey, you finished setting up a profile, good job. And it sort of explains what to do next if you don't know. Go back. It will save that search result for you if you want to come back and look at it later for some reason. And now we're back at the main profile menu, and what you can see is there's been some new items added under seed search. These are what you're actually going to use to search for various seeds to do your RNG abuse. And there's some of them there that are locked. Those are in-app purchases. They're just $1, but you know, it's up to you what you want to do. Alright, I just covered Unova Link Key System calibration, but we should calibrate again, and this time I'm going to go ahead and use the IVs to calibrate just to demonstrate how that's done. So I'm going to go back to my DS just a second. Alright, I'm back at my DS start menu, and just like the last time, I'm going to start the game at a particular time. Doesn't matter exactly when, I just need to pay attention. So I started right then, which it just became 1:37. Remember, don't touch anything until this logo appears, and then you're free to hit that A button to get to the main menu. While that's all going on, I'm going to come back to PPRNG. I'm going to be doing the parameter search from IVs. There's that profile data again. And as I said, we started at 1:37, so I want to go ahead and set that now so I don't forget it. Okay, don't have any held buttons, and the next thing is IVs. What we're going to be doing is we're going to go ahead and go into the game and catch Pokemon, and we're going to see what its IVs are, and PPRNG can use that to determine what seed you hit and therefore do some calibration. So I'll start this game. Again, I'm just going to continue my game. I've already saved in Victory Road, so that's set up ahead of time. Important to note, don't start the C gear. If you do start that, it messes up all of the IV generation, and we won't be able to calibrate. And that actually goes for RNG manipulation in general. You're going to want to leave that C gear off. So I'm going to leave that off. As I said, I'm in Victory Road. I can catch a reasonably high level Pokemon here, which allows me to get a pretty good idea of what its IVs are. So I have with me an Among Us that has Sweet Scent, and I'm just going to trigger that right now to get an encounter. You can also try and take a few steps to get an encounter. The danger is every time you move, it counts as a step, and there's an internal step counter, and every so often it will do some internal calculations after a certain number of steps, and it consumes numbers from the IV random number generators. So if you take too many steps and you're unlucky, it will mess up the IVs that you get in your encounter, and you won't be able to do your calibration. So best to use Sweet Scent if at all possible. Okay, so I've encountered a Boldore. This is very unsurprising in this particular location. I'm just going to go ahead and throw a Master Ball at this, because I'm not going to be saving my game, and it's just going to save me a bunch of time. I just want to catch it, look at the stats, and then I'll turn off the power. So while that's going on, I'm going to go back to PPRNG. I'm going to open up the IV calculator, and I'm going to start preparing for calculation. I know we've encountered a Boldore, so I just need to put in the first couple letters. And next I need to know what the nature is, so I've caught that now. Go back to the game and see what we got. Okay, this is a modest nature. And once we set that, the next thing I need to do is check what is the characteristic. This one is, in Japanese, it's ochokochoi, which is kind of a funny sounding thing, but it means, in English, it becomes impetuous and silly. Okay, so like any IV calculator, I need to enter a level. It's 47, and then I need to enter the stats. So I'll flip to the next page here. We've got our stats. I'm just going to start typing these in. 129, 95, 111, and next we have 67 and 43 and 34. Okay, that's all we need. If I click calculate, that should give me some IVs. Pretty tight range, variance of 1, 2 in a few places. And by calculating that, it's actually filled in the IVs on that previous screen for me. Very convenient, if I do say so myself. So it's all actually set up to search now. Those parameter ranges are predetermined based on the console type you have and the game and the language. So we pretty much always want to leave those alone. I'm just going to start a search. And what are we going to find? There we go. If you remember, I started at 137, and this seed was at 137.01. That's that 1 second delay I discussed previously. And those are the IVs, and more importantly, we have timer 0 of 10F7. Maybe you recall that is the same one we found last time. This is all part of the calibration process. You do have to repeat it several times to actually get an idea of your range. It does turn out for me that on this game 10F7 comes up quite often. So I have determined for my particular game that there's 3 or 4 values that come up often enough that I think it's worthwhile to run searches over them, and that's what I ultimately set up for my parameter ranges. Everybody's game is a little bit different, or rather game and DS combination is a little bit different, so you need to run this calibration process a number of times until you have an idea what is the possible range of timer 0 values, and also what are the values that come up most often for you. Regardless, that was the IV calibration process. That's the same process you would use for your black or white game when you don't have the Unova Link available. Just a final note regarding these in-app purchases. If you want to know what you're buying before you do that, you can select these, and it will bring up a description. This happens to be in Japanese because I switched my language recently just now from Japanese to English, and it seems it's got some leftovers somewhere in the system. Never fear, it will come up for English for you. Anyway, it's describing what this does, and more importantly, down here there's a preview, so you can take a look at the whole searcher, what sort of parameters you can set. For example, this is the complete encounter searcher, and let's say, for example, I don't know, let's say I want to find a sandile in my game somewhere. PPRNG knows that it's only available as a normal grass or cave encounter. In this case, desert falls under that topic. So it already pre-selects that, and it's already narrowed down the possible locations where you can find those. It selects them all, assuming you don't have a preference, but if you have a preference, you deselect some of these. And For those of you that have more experience with the RNG manipulation process, you know that to do an encounter, you need to take into consideration encounter slots. But now, with this version of PPRNG, it has all the data inside it. You just need to say what locations you are interested in, and it will figure out what are the correct encounter slots for those locations. So that's one of the nice features of this version. A number of other options, and of course what IVs you want, etc. And this preview functionality is available for each possible in-app purchase. So you can't actually run the search, but you can play around with the parameters to get an idea of what's possible. Anyway, I hope you consider unlocking those purchases. I think they're very useful. Obviously, I'm the guy who made them, so I would think that now, wouldn't I? Anyway, that's the conclusion of this video. We covered setting up your profile and doing calibration both with the Unova Link and also the original IV process.